Hello, all, and welcome back to the Global Realignment Podcast. Thank you for joining me. Today is March 25th, 2025, Friday. And we're going to be touching on a story related to Trump's ongoing war on the First Amendment. We touched on a story a few videos back related to the activist Mahmoud Khalil, who was the head of an organization that was part of the larger protests that were happening across college campuses last year. The protests were related to Israel's ongoing war in the Gaza Strip. Another target has been apprehended for similar reasons. A Turkish national called Rumseya Ozturk. And she's here on a visa, so this is slightly different than Mahmoud's situation. She was a student at Tufts University. She's on a student visa. Mahmoud is at Columbia. He actually had a green card, and he's married to a citizen. So her situation slightly different. But she was apprehended for similar reasons, participating in the protests last year that took place across the campuses, the college campuses. Now, I want to make one thing clear before we jump into the story. I'm indifferent to any of the perspectives that these students hold on the issue of the Gaza conflict, right? And to me, this is a simple case of infringing on a constitutionally protected right, obviously the First Amendment. Now, with that being said, I'm not a free speech absolutist. I do believe there are limits when it comes to the First Amendment, but there's the stumbling block of knowing what those limits are and who defines those limits. And that's an ongoing conversation. It's been happening for a very long time. And so, great example of this would be the question of what incites violence, what speech incites violence, right? And who determines if said speech incites violence. Now, unfortunately, because of how radically partisan our country is, these questions are just left unanswered. Now, I oppose these initiatives that are happening, that the Trump administration is pursuing as it relates to these students, because they're taking place, obviously, at the behest of a foreign nation, which is Israel, and the Jewish diaspora and the Israel lobby in our country. It isn't about national security. This is what Marco Rubio wants us to believe. It isn't about, keeping Jewish snowflakes feeling safe on college campuses. It's just really about silencing any criticism leveled against the state of Israel and their ongoing war in the Gaza Strip. And also silencing dissent in the face of the incoming war or potential war that the U.S. Starts with Iran. And we're building up. We did a video previously about this, but the buildup is happening pretty rapidly. Trump basically gave the Iranians a deadline to respond to his initiative to start negotiations regarding a new nuclear deal. And the deadline's in April. And if the deadline passes, only God knows what's going to happen. And this, of course, would, anything that we do related to any kind of military action against Iran would also be at the behest of Israel. And by the way, Israel is also starting aggression again with Lebanon. They recently, I think the past day, started bombing targets in Lebanon again, and they're telling residents to move away from the neighborhoods where they're targeting. So that's all starting back up. So, despite what the administration is saying about this situation, these people harm our national security and all of these different things. It's really just about this is all being done on behalf of the Israel lobby, Jewish students, and Israel itself. And honestly, I don't believe that this is going to stop with foreign nationals, right? That's the unfortunate part about this. I think that this is going to probably affect even just, American citizens as well. And I think that there are a lot of people that support Trump, that support these initiatives. But So one thing we have to keep in mind is that, and I'm not one of these people that would say, well, eye for an eye, but the Democrats did this very same thing with, the January 6th protesters. They said these are basically national security risks and they need to be locked up. Some of them need to get 20, 25, 30-year sentences, all these different things. So it's very, very similar situations in that regard. And a lot of these people right now that Trump is targeting have been legitimately terrorizing these campuses. They've been pretty radical on these campuses even before October 7th and this war started, right? I think that's probably why you're seeing a lot of sentiment on the right wing as it relates to this, because these types that Trump is apprehending, these liberal progressive types, they have, we think back at 2020, a lot of protests were happening on college campuses as well during that time for, when it came down, relative to BLM and Antifa and all of these things. And that, in 2020, I'm not saying that Trump didn't do anything as it related to those uprisings and the student activism on behalf of George Floyd and all of these things. But I don't think that he pressed nearly as aggressively as he's doing right now in order to defend, Israeli students and the state of Israel itself. So I don't know where that aggressive push was then, but it's certainly something that we're seeing right now, which is worrying, again, because we have to think about, what kind of outcomes are we going to see after these cases or so. Let's say they get deported. Are Americans going to be targeted next? Not with deportation, but, with penalties for criticizing the state of Israel and the ongoing war and these kinds of things. So Israel continues to run our immigration, our foreign policy, our speech policy, and these kinds of things. And it's unfortunate, right? Now, we're going to get into this story. It's pretty brief, and it's about this initiative that Marco Rubio has launched. It's called Catch and Revoke. And so I'm just going to get into a few points here. Many of these points are basically from Axios. You can find the full story on Axios, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio is launching an AI-fueled catch and revoke effort to cancel the visas of foreign nationals who appear to support Hamas or other designated terrorist groups. At the heart of the plan is the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, which certifies schools to accept student visa holders. Institutions have been decertified in the past if the government determines they have too many student visa holders who are using the education system as a ruse to live and work in the U.S. And that probably happens often. If this student and exchange visitor program was being investigated for those reasons that I just mentioned, I'd probably support it, right? The problem is that we're doing this strictly for Israeli students and the state of Israel. So, if we were just looking into some of the students that are here on this program that could potentially be using the program for as a ruse to live and work in the U.S., that would be something that rational people should support. Maybe overhauling that system to prevent that kind of fraud from happening. But unfortunately, we know that's not going to happen. And that's largely because Trump has said several times that he wants to expand the visa program for kids that are going to college and graduating here and give them green cards once they get a degree at even a community college, a community-based college. So he's got a specific type of immigrant that he wants in the country that to be legalized and work. But these types, I guess, they don't fit that description. The Immigration Nationality Act of 1952 gives the Secretary of State the authority to revoke visas from foreigners deemed to be a threat. And obviously the question would be, what constitutes a threat and who determines, how is that threat determined, right? Initiatives, the initiative Catch and Revoke includes AI-assisted reviews of tens of thousands of student visa holders' social media accounts looking for evidence of alleged terrorist sympathies expressed after October 7th. Expanded monitoring and spying, basically, on legal residents. Not citizens, legal residents, but legal residents also have constitutional protections as well. So, including First Amendment protections. The State Department is working with the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security. To launch Catch and Revoke, federal officials examined 100,000 people in the student exchange visitor system since October 2023 to see if any visas had been revoked because the student had been arrested or suspended from school. Now, if they're looking into, the number of students in this program, I think, is in the millions. But if they're looking into as many students as they are right now, that could potentially discourage students that aren't in the country right now from coming over and taking advantage of our education system, which would obviously conflict with, again, Trump's initiative, his explicitly stated initiative that he wants the best and the brightest foreigners to come over here so they can, go to our colleges and then the government can staple green cards to their degrees. So I don't know if he's going to get those numbers that he wants to cut, those tech workers that Elon Musk wants to import. So we'll see. State officials said we found literally zero visa revocations during the Biden administration, which suggests a blind eye attitude toward law enforcement. More than 300 foreign students have had their student visas revoked in the past 3 weeks. The blueprint for the new program can be found in Operation Boulder of 1972, when the Nixon administration infiltrated and surveilled pro-Palestinian groups, which he said infringed on the rights of U.S. citizens as well as foreign nationals. Now, back then, it might have actually been more of a threat, right? I mean, many of those groups back in those days were probably, literally tied to the more radical elements of the Palestinian movement throughout the Middle East at that time. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. The Trump administration's pro-Israel posture reflects his and Rubio's longstanding commitment toward the Jewish state, an issue of intense interest to white evangelicals really in general. I don't know why it's specifically white evangelicals, but honestly, many dispensationalist Christians are sadly confused by the Genesis 12 verse 3. This is an aside, but many of them are confused by that, in my estimation, when God promised Abraham, those who bless you will be blessed. I've asked this question to many people. What do they think that God meant by that when he said that? Many of them will say, well, you got to bless Israel. We have to do good by Israel so that we can be blessed. Well, I always ask them, well, when God says, I will bless, I ask basically, who is the you, right? I will bless those who bless you, Abraham. The you is the nation, right? The nation that would come from Abraham, right? The blessing, what does that mean? Well, blessing can be many different things. In my mind, it's blessing today as a Christian relative to a Jew would be introducing them to the Gospels and converting them. The point that I'm making is that God was speaking to Abraham and his descendants. The point I'm making is that the nation is not equivalent to a formal state the way we understand it today, right? And so when God says, I will bless those who bless you, he's talking about a nation, a people. You bless the people by introducing them to Christ. Not necessarily rubber stamping everything that the state of Israel does. That's not blessing anybody except them. And think true Christians understand that God will preserve the Jewish people, right? We don't need to give them bombs and convince everyone that the land is what's keeping them alive. God is going to preserve who he's going to preserve. So just throwing that out there. Many are asking, this is just continuing with the article, who decides what pro-Hamas constitutes? Pro-Hamas right now means pro-Palestinian. If you're a pro-Palestinian activist, that means you're pro-Hamas in the eyes of the administration in Israel. Very important to understand that. Simple propaganda, and many gullible, myopic Americans will eat it up and believe that, if you're a pro-Palestinian activist, then you're obviously supporting Hamas. Similar situations happening in Israel right now, where basically everybody in the Gaza Strip is Hamas in the eyes of the Israeli government. And what's looking more and more, like our administration, the American administration, Trump's administration is adopting that view that there are no innocents over in Gaza. They're all Hamas, right? And so this is the way they're blurring the line, right? If you're an activist, then you're pro-Hamas. If you're in the Gaza Strip, you're with Hamas in some way or another, and we just can't help it. That's the collateral damage. And many people throw their hands up and just turn the other way. And, it's especially confusing, especially coming from Christians. That's an unfortunate thing. Article continues, the kind of explicit viewpoint-driven decision-making is ripe for abuse and risks arbitrary enforcement. And that was a statement from a legal director, Will Creeley. I have some more notes here. The question, it kind of goes back to the idea of some of the things that we were asking back in 2020, and that's, what is racism? What is pro-Hamas? What is anti-Semitism? Again, what's incitement of violence? Many of these things aren't really defined clearly, right? They're defined by the groups, the victim groups, the way they want to define it on any given day. But it was just the same question that we were asking in 2020 during the George Floyd riots. Who is a racist in the end? Many people were saying, like from BLM and Antifa, many people were saying, you're racist. To white people, you're racist and you don't know it. You're not conscious of it, but you are. Therefore, there's nothing you can do about it. You're just racist. Is that how we're going to start defining anti-Semitism? We're pretty much there when it comes to, anti-Semitism. We're at that same place, unfortunately. So, and also there is a group. This is just one example of the power of Israeli-influenced groups in our countries. There is this group called Betar US, and it's one of a number of right-wing pro-Israeli groups that are supporting the administration's efforts to deport international students involved in university pro-Palestinian protests, working closely with congressmen and allegedly the administration as well. And it claims it has submitted thousands of names they've collected to the administration. And this group describes itself as loud, proud, aggressive, and an unapologetically Zionist movement dedicated to defending Israel's legitimacy and strengthening the Jewish connection to the land of Israel. So it gives you an idea of some of the groups that the administration is working with right now to spy and round up citizens and legal residents. Article continues here. Last week, to escape losing $400 million in federal money, Colombia caved in administration demands to combat anti-Semitism and limit protests. On March 5th, the DOJ's new anti-Semitism task force launched a civil rights investigation of the University of California system. On March 10th, the Education Department sent letters to 60 universities warning them of possible civil rights enforcement actions concerning anti-Semitism. And we have one official just wrapping up here that has been quoted as saying, what you're going to see in the not too distant future is the universities that we can show that we're not doing anything to stop these demonstrations in support of Hamas or encouraged enrollment by activists. We can stop approving student visas for them. and they can no longer admit foreign students, the official said. So it's a lot of effort to be putting in, again, on behalf of a foreign state and foreign students themselves, Jewish students. A lot of effort to be putting in by this administration to do that. They wouldn't cut visas off so that Americans could have opportunities at jobs that foreign students are taking. But we'll cut visas off if somebody says that they're pro-Palestinian. It's a horrible thing. And let's hope for successful outcomes for these two detained legal residents. Because if that's not the outcome, then as I said earlier in the video, this could come to regular American citizens. Again, not deportations, but, legal consequences for, allegedly being pro-terrorist or pro-Hamas or something. So that's all I have to say about that. And we'll see everyone next time. Thanks for joining.